Hello and welcome to what I assume will be a very long tutorial if you're watching this in full. However, I will also be splitting it down to smaller pieces. Probably about 3 minutes long or so, depending on how much depth I go into all of these different areas. What this will hopefully teach you is the entire basics of PHP and some of the advanced stuff, from syntax to variables to different types of functions, sessions, cookies, uploading files. I don't think I'm sorry. I don't think I'm going to be going into anything like classes or exceptions or multi-dimensional arrays or anything like that. However, we'll see how things go, and if I'm feeling up to it, then maybe, you never know. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do, oh, by the way, I am going to assume that you have a basic knowledge of at least one previous programming language, by which I mean that you know, like, at the end of each line to like put a semicolon there, and also to work out what sort of brackets are being used where. Originally or initially, I will tell you, just in case any of you haven't, because as I said, this is the basic video. But I will be. I might skip over it occasionally, and I expect you to either look at the code carefully or to sort of know that, say, it's a curly bracket instead of an ordinary bracket. So that's the difference on my computer. As you can see, it's not a very clear difference, so you will need to watch this in full screen HD, in 1080p probably, or 720p minimum. Anything less than that and you will struggle to actually see what you're looking at. And there's been quite a lot of times when my YouTube videos have been commented on saying that it's very unclear, or like you can barely read it, and as soon as, like, when I go back and look at that video, I can see what they mean, but when I load it into HD, it looks fine. So just load it in HD. If your internet can't do HD, or if your screen isn't large enough or anything, then you may have to try and like sort of squint because it will look blurry. But I can't help anything to do with that because I've got to do it in HD like this, just because it's the best way to do it, really. So what we've got loaded up here is I've got my text editor here, which is how I'm going to be coding it. Then over here I've got FileZilla, and then in my third one I've got my web browser, where I'm going to be showing you what it looks like. So one thing that we will be doing is later on we'll be getting into mysql, which is the database connection. And so as you can see here, what I've done is I've created a connect.php file, which you don't need to do. I will show you how to connect to MySQL, don't worry. But what I've got in there is my connection information, because that way you don't get access to my server and know what my password and stuff is. So when I do include for the my connect.php file, just ignore that, and I will show you how to actually connect it normally, and then I'll delete that and include my file. Also, I'm going to assume that you have previously installed and managed to check that PHP is set up and running, as well as MySQL, Apache, all that sort of stuff. So whether you've got a server or whether you're doing it localhost, it makes no difference. All I need is that you have it so it's set up and it works. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and we shall get started with the syntax for PHP. Right, okay, so the syntax for PHP is basically, you open it up with a less than and a question mark and then word PHP, and then you close it with question mark greater than. And what this does is it tells the encryption, or not the encryption, the compiler, where to actually look for PHP code, because if it was to run and check every single file for PHP code, it would be inefficient and it wouldn't work as good as it does. And so what we are doing is we're basically giving it a hint that what we have here is what we want to be compiled, and so we put that within these two brackets. There is also other methods of how to do it, like you can do it that way. There we go, sorry. So we just ignore the word PHP. That works, but only on certain servers, so you won't be seeing me do that, just in case your server doesn't hold it. There is a way to check it, and that is to go into your php.ini file. It's a settings file for PHP, and once you're in there, it's a big long list of different settings, like basically just like variables. And once you go in and you've seen them, one of them will mention something to do with short tags. I can't remember the exact name of it, but it's something like PHP short tags. And if you do that, then when you're in there and you see that, if it says on or one, I think I'm not sure whether it's binary or not. If it says on, then you can use these tags. If it says off, then just change it to on, and you can use these tags. And to change it, you may not be able to, depending on where it's saved on your system and how your system's set up. Some servers don't allow you to change the INI settings. If it doesn't and it says off, then all you have to do is just put the 3 letters PHP after the question mark, the first question mark, and it will work fine. One thing to note is that you should never put PHP and then the end question marks, because that isn't valid, and so it will throw errors most likely. Okay, so that's the end of syntax, and the next thing we're going to get onto is variables. Right, okay, so now we're on to variables. Here we go. Just open up your syntax. I'm going to call these open and close tags, just so if I mention that, then that is what I mean. Okay, to start a variable, what we do in PHP, different languages do it differently, but for PHP we put a $sign and then we put the variable name, so like hello, and that will create a variable called hello. A variable is essentially somewhere on a system where you store information in your memory, so your RAM. And so a variable is essentially an easier way for us to remember what part of the RAM a piece of information is stored on. And so the way that RAM works is that your CPU will send across 3 pieces of data. The first one will be a read or a write, depending on what we're trying to do. The second one will be the address, which is what our variable is. That is, it's a sort of a textual representation of a different address. So that could be the address of, say, memory allocation, like that. And that would be the location of what that is exactly the same as. And what that would allow us to do is have it so that whatever is stored in the actual area, in that memory allocation, it gets fetched, and that is what we have as our variable. You don't really need to understand that, that's more to understand the components of a computer, so if you don't understand what I just said, just ignore that, it doesn't matter. But basically, a variable is a place where we store information or data, depending on what you want to store. It could be text, which is called a string, or it could be numbers, which is like integers or decimals, floats, or you could store constants. There's loads of different things you can store. And so what I am going to do for this one is I'm going to store it as a string. So I would have, you set it equal to something, so it's variable hello is equal to, and then we put double quotes. You can use single quotes, and that works perfectly fine, and I'll get into why we should use which ones later on. But if we just do hello world, I know it's a bit cliche, but it is what we're going to do, so ignore that. And just type whatever you want in it, because it's a string, so whatever you put will work. One thing that's worth noting is that some variables are written like this, some variables are written like that, and some variables are written like those are the 4 valid ways in which you can write a variable. If you were to do something like hello space world, you can understand why that wouldn't work, and that is simply because if you have a space, PHP is going to assume that it's a separate command, and so you use underscores or dashes, usually underscores, because okay, you can't use dashes, So you use underscores, which is just a simple way for PHP, sorry, for you to be able to read what's happening where. And also you can start it with an underscore, which people usually do to reference a super global or global. For example, we have that, which is a super global variable, which we'll get into later. The get, post, and request, cookies, sessions, that sort of thing, they're all super globals. And I'll explain more what that means later on. But one thing I should stress is that you cannot start a variable with a number. I can't do 23 hello, for example. That won't work. No variable can start with a number, but it can contain a number, so I can do hello 2. That would be fine. As long as it doesn't start with a number, it works. As long as it doesn't start or contain a space, it will work. It can't contain symbols, so I can't do I can't do that. That won't work. Or anything like that. The simple reason for that is that symbols are quite often used within PHP for other things, and other programming languages also use symbols quite a lot, so you cannot use symbols. For example, to do something like that, that is a different meaning for, it's like a reference basically, and so you can't use symbols with variables. Okay, so what we are going to carry on with these variables is just getting this to display on the screen. This is a simple statement which says echo hello, and hello, as you'll notice, starts with starts with a $sign, which means that it references this $sign here, which is the variable, which then will reference what this string is. And so when this gets printed out or echoed out, it's going to basically be the same as if we did. It's essentially the same as if we did that. So if we go across and upload it, just a second. Oh, now is not the time for my internet to be slow. There we go. Load that, there you can see we've got hello world being displayed, which is what we'd expect. Now if we go back, delete that, save it again, upload it again, you'll see that we get exactly the same content. And so a variable is just a way to store a piece of information, which is useful when we have various different things going on at once to help us keep track of where things are and what they're doing. We store them inside variables. So that's the end of variables. The next thing we're going to cover is strings in a bit more depth. Okay, so a string, as we've mentioned before, is anything which is within a pair of quotation marks. And so you could have, well, I'll do this as a general echo. So, hello world. As you'll notice, by the way, I am ending all the lines with a semicolon. If you don't do this, PHP often throws errors. I don't know if it will throw an error for a single line, but PHP often throws errors. Okay, don't throw errors for a single line. If I was to add the next line, which is, if I was to do something like this, it should throw an error. Oh, let it load it. There we go. As you can see, we get an error. If you get an error like this, by the way, the best thing to do is either have a look at your code and see, here it says expecting a comma or semicolon on line 4. If we go back, I'll just get the line numbers up. Here you can see on line 4 it says expecting a semicolon, and so usually when it gives us an error, it's normally like 1 or 2 lines before that error. So there we'll notice that we're missing a semicolon and we're missing one there as well. And so if we add that, and my computer's been really slow today. There we go. Save, go across, transfer, go across again, and here you go. It works. And so when you're given errors, the best thing to do is to go have a look back at your code, see what the error says, and fix it accordingly. It's normally simple to do. If you don't understand what it means, or if you can't see what the problem is, then the best thing to do is just go over and type what the error is into Google. Usually it'll come up with somebody who's had a similar problem and they've managed to fix it, and quite a lot of forums are dedicated to PHP or programming, so you should be able to find it fairly easily. Okay, so another thing that you can do with programming with strings is that you can concatenate two strings together. And the way that's done in PHP is with a full stop or period. So you have one string, and then you do period, and then you do another string, and that will just display simply just hello world as a single thing. Basically what it does is it puts two different strings and puts them as if they were just one string, and so you could do this with as many strings as you want. So that would work fine. So, for example, sorry, I forgot to check that. There we go. Hello world, this is another string. So as you can see there, that works perfectly fine. And the way this is useful is if your string is getting too long, what you can do is when you concatenate it, you can put it onto a new line, and it works perfectly fine without messing up your styling or anything. And so this way you can see what's going on, and it makes it easier on the eye to look at, so that you can understand more what is happening. Other things that you can do with strings is, I mentioned earlier that there's two different types of quotes. Now there isn't actually a benefit. I think it's the double quote is actually slightly faster at being rendered, or being processed rather, simply because the single quote is quicker at being rendered because the double quote allows variables to be placed within it, whereas the single quote doesn't. So if we mix what we know so far about the two things, and we do hello like that, and then we do this is a string, what this will do in theory is print out that word hello and not the actual string. It may be different now. I've not actually used PHP in quite a while, so I'm not sure. No, there we go. This is a string $hello. But you'll be looking at your code and you're thinking, well, what's wrong with this? Why isn't it referencing that? And sometimes you can even add curly brackets around it, which is, by the way, on the keyboard it's next to your return key. It's where the square brackets are, next to your P and your O, and below your minus and your plus, and it's just those ones. You press shift and then those keys, and that's the curly brackets. Yeah, save that. Go across over here, and as you can see, it doesn't work that time either. And so you may be sat here wondering what's going on, why isn't it working? And then if you change these quotes, there we go, to double quotes, there we go, and we go across over here. You'll see that suddenly it works, and so that is why single quotes are faster than double quotes. It's because it doesn't check for variables within it, whereas double quotes do. And these curly brackets, basically, it's a way of telling the string that there is definitely a variable there, and so it often does work. It often does work without the double quotes, but it's better to put those in because it makes sure. See, it still works, but when you put the curly brackets in, it makes sure that it references the variable. Okay, so the next thing to say about strings is that if you were to, instead of having the quotes within the, the variable within the quotes, what you could do is you could do, say if you really wanted to use single quotes for whatever reason, maybe if you do things within within other quotes or whatever, sometimes the quotes don't work properly. So if you were to do the word don't, you would need to do it double quotes on the outside and then a single quote on the inside, because if you did single quotes on the outside and single quote on the inside, as you can see by the syntax highlighting, it doesn't look right, and that is because it doesn't recognise punctuation as being free grammar. It recognises it for being a command for the computer, and therefore a single quote is opening, a single quote is ending. Here we've got single quote is opening again, and the rest of it is seen as being part of the string. And so what you do is we just change those into double quotes, and it should work fine. So there we go, and you can see that we've got the single quote there, which looks fine. If we go over now into our PHP file again, one thing which I'm going to mention now, and I'm probably going to reference again later on, but I won't talk about it, is the use of concatenation for variables. So if this is a string saying okay, so this way, it's outside the quotes, so if we have single quotes, double quotes, it makes no difference because it's concatenated. And so this is seen as being a string, and so it's exactly the same as just having, this is a string saying, and then concatenated hello world instead of $hello. So when we go into our upload page, there we go, this is a string saying hello world, and so whether it's single quotes, double quotes, whatever you have there, that will work fine. Okay, so that's the end of our bit on string, and now we're going to do a bit of maths. So if you dislike maths, I'm sorry, but it is a crucial part in pretty much every single programming language, and so we just have to get it over and done with. But I'll try not to spend too long on this. Okay, so the first thing to note is that we have the basics, which is 5 plus 2, and as you can hopefully tell me, that's just 7. We've also, these are the, okay, these are what the operators are which are available to us. We've got plus, minus, divide, times, modulus, and then, well, they're the main ones, so they're the ones I'm going to talk about. What we can do is, whilst we have the echo set up 5 plus 2, what we're going to do is we're going to change this into all the different ones so you can see exactly what it is. I bet it does. The one that you might not have done before is modulus, and that's fine. It's fairly easy to understand, and you don't need it very often. I'll show you later on one case of when we do use it. I'll probably show you one case. If not, then I'll do a video on it at some point. It's fairly simple to understand. Great, okay, frozen. Try again. Okay, I'm not sure why this isn't working at all. It should work, so I mean, okay, for now I'm just going to show you in the preview here. Okay, so as you can see, 5 plus 2 is 7. So if we go back here and we change this to a minus, you can guess that it's going to be 3. If we change this to a times, you can guess it's going to be 10. And if we change it to divide, we get 2.5. Okay, so that's all perfectly fine, but now the one which you may find odd is modulus, which is shown by the percentage sign, which is shift 5, and that comes up as 1. And so you may be wondering what it is that makes it become 1. And so what modulus basically is it works out the remainder. So we do 5 divided by 2, basically, which gives us 2.5, which it takes the first bit, so we've got 2 lots of 2, we've got 2 and a 2, and there, a 2 and a 2, but what's left over is a 1. So that is what it does basically, it just works out what the remainder is for us. And so if we were to do 7 mod 3, that will come up at, I think, 2. No, 1 again. There we go. Refresh that, there we go. So that comes up as a 1. If we do 7 mod 2, that comes up as a 3, I think. Should do 7. Oh no, of course, that's right. 7 divided by 2 is 3.5. And so what we do is there's a 3 and a 3, and then there's 1 left over. So that does make sense, that's fine. That was me just being stupid. Sorry about that. Okay, so they're the basic operators, or maths thingies. But then there's also 2 others, which I will show you now. And the first one, I'm just going to call the variable x, which is, if I do variable x is equal to 0, which that 0 there is an integer, and integers we do not need to put inside quotes because it is to be treated as a number and not a string. Only strings go inside quotes. So if we did x plus plus and then just echo x, what you imagine we'll see here, I'll get rid of that one, is, well, it starts off with 0 and plus plus is an incrementation of 1. And so if we look at this, it will come up being 1, and I fix that error. Oh, I forgot all the semicolons that time. That was clever of me. Here we go. So there we go, 1. Now if we were to copy and paste this a couple of times, there we go. It's now 6. And so all it does is it just adds 1 to the thing. And so when you've got incrementation, the obvious opposite of that is decrementation, which is minus and minus. And so when we look at this, we've now got minus 1. If we did that 6 times again, we'd get minus 6. But then there's also another version of this, which is to do it the opposite direction, so it's plus plus, and then the variable 1. Variable x. What that does is there is a difference between having the pluses before and afterwards. When it's afterwards, it reads that variable and then adds 1 to it. When it's before, it adds 1 to whatever that variable is. And so when you do it beforehand, it checks the data type, whereas if you do it afterwards, it checks the data type. If you do it beforehand, it just assumes that it's going to be an integer or a double or something it can actually add a number to. So say if that was 0.5, there you can see it's 1.5. So it doesn't matter whether it's an integer or not. And by the way, in case you don't know, an integer is something which is a full whole number. And so if it isn't a full whole number, well, using something as an integer, it has to be a whole number. If it's not, then it's called a double or a float. You don't really need to know the meanings of them, but basically a double is something with decimals, and a float is just the same thing but a different name for it. It's slightly more technical than that, but there's no point going into it at this moment in time. So you've now seen incrementation and decrementation, which is good. But now what we have to do is we have to cover assignment operators, which is sort of things like when you have something which is equal to something, or if you have something that is not equal to something, stuff like that. But the assignment ones, the first ones we're going to do is I'm going to set up two variables, x and y. And the simple reason for that is that whenever I do something and it's not meaning anything, I do x and y, and z, or sometimes I, j and k. Usually just letters which don't mean anything. But when you do name variables properly, you should name them in a way that's useful. So if it was an integer, you should name it like int. And if it's the age, int age, in camel case, which is where you have uppercase letters in the middle. I think that is the best way to actually name things, because that way you won't get confused over what is super globals with stuff like the underscore at the beginning, and you won't get confused with whereabouts the actual underscore is inside the word. And so I use camel case pretty much all the time if I can help it. So we're going to use x and y in this example. So let's see. If I have x equal to 15 and y equal to 45, what we're going to do here is we're just going to do the first one is to set something equal to something, which we have already done here, but I'm going to show you again. If we do $x equals $y, and then here I'm going to do echo x. Now when I see this, you would expect now we have x equal to 15, y equal to 45, and so we have x is equal to what y is. So what it'll do is it looks up here, so x is now equal to 45. It ignores the previous there, which is x equals 15, and so x now is 45. Review this. There we go. X equals 45. And then the next one is plus equals. So this will now make it equal 60. There you go. And what that does is it adds it. That's basically the same as doing $x plus y, except for it just because that is repeated. There's no point in repeating that at all. It just wastes memory and space. And so what we do, and waste time as well, so what we do is we just add the plus before the equal sign. And so obviously when you think about that, the obvious ones to do are all the other ones, such as minus, times, divide, modulus. And so you would be correct in assuming that they all exist. We've got the minus there, which will do exactly the same. We've got divide, and we've got modulus and multiply. All of them, by the way, go before the equal sign, not afterwards. But then there's also another one which exists, which is concatenation, which is more useful in strings than it is in numbers. However, it will work with numbers. It just makes it 1, 5, 1, 4. What it does is it basically assumes or turns these into strings, which is something that most other languages don't actually do. If you set it to a type, then it stays at that type. For example, in other languages, you would have to do something like that, which is integer x equals 15, and it tells it what sort of variable it's going to be. In PHP, you don't have to do that. You can use whatever means you want for a type of variable, which is one of the reasons why PHP is probably my favourite language. With other languages, say if you have an array, you can't mix your types inside the array, which gets really annoying. But for this, in PHP, you can, which is good. And so concatenation, it makes x equal, it's basically the same as x dot y, which you would get like that, which would obviously do 15, 45, which is what we've got. 15, 45. There we go. Okay, and now what we're going to do is, well, that's the end of that one. And so now we're going on to conditionals, which is things like if and else. By the way, when you hear me pause at the end of each one of these, it's because I'm going to be going on to, well, I've got a piece of paper next to me and writing down the start and end times of each one so that I can split it up later easily. So just ignore me for like 3 seconds after each section. And that's also why I give each section a bit of an introduction, because when I come to split it up into small pieces, people want to, well, it's so that people know what they are actually watching, which before they have to get to watch it, basically. Okay, so conditionals, we're going to start with if and else. There we go. If, so we're just going to do 1 equals 1 for now. There we go. If 1 equals 1, then just echo true. Okay, so that, as you can see, throws an error. But when you look back at this, you're like thinking, well, why is that wrong? And that is because this is an assignment. It is not a conditional operator. It's an assignment operator. You're saying that 1 is equal to 1, as in you want it to be equal to 1, not to check whether it is. And to check, what you do is you have to do 2 equal signs next to each other. Okay, so when you look at that now, that makes, it still makes total sense. You're saying 1 is equal to 1. And so when we look at that now, it comes up as true. That is good. And if we change that to 2, obviously it'll be false, but it doesn't say anything because we've not put a conditional here. And so what we do is we put an else in, and this will do echo false. And so what this, now if we think about this logically, it goes if 1 is equal to 2, then echo true. If it isn't, echo false, which is basically what else is. And so if 1 is equal to 2, print it out. If not, print this out. And so obviously that is the reason why we get this, because 1 does not equal 2. If we get 1 is equal to 1 like that, this will come up as a pass out. Deleted the bracket. Okay, try it again. True. However, if we also use the other type of conditional operator, which is the 3 equal sign, that comes up as false. And now, if you're thinking, well, what's the difference between 2 and 3? Well, when you have 2 operators, 2 equal signs as an operator, it's checking that the values are the same. When you have 3, it's checking that the data types are the same as well. And this one, as you can see, I put it inside quotes, which makes it a string, whereas this one is an integer because it's not got any quotes. And so it's quite often useful to use 3 equal signs. However, most of the time I will be using 2 for these videos. As you can see, it just makes it less strict. Right, this is starting to annoy me now. Right, okay, just give me 2 seconds of just plugging in a mouse because this is starting to frustrate me with the trackpad. There we go. Okay, so as you can see, we've got if 1 is equal to 1, then true, if not else. However, there is something else we can do, which I'm going to change these to be something different just so it makes more sense. So I'm going to do hello equals hello. And obviously with conditionals you can check absolutely anything, so whether it's going to be string, integers, variables, your choice. And so if I do hello is equal to hello, then echo true, else if hello is equal to world, echo false, else echo other. Okay, so what this will do is we have the if hello is equal to world is equal to hello, then we're going to print true. If hello is equal to world, we're going to print false. And if it is not equal to either of those two, so as a default, it'll print other. And so if we go here and we have true, if we change this to world, then we have false. If we change this to worlds, then we get other. Okay, and so as you can see, if we decided to do a long list of different else ifs, you would have more options, more choices, and whatever for what we need to do. So, but that can be untidy, and so what we tend to do instead is we tend to do stuff with switch arrays, but I'll get into that in a few minutes after I've finished going over these different types of conditionals. So what we can do is to turn it around, we can check whether it is not equal to it is not equal to what you would use to. So that's going to be true, but it's also false, which... Oh, the reason why it's not going to check the other one is if it does it in logical order. So it checks the first one, and then it checks the next one, and then it checks the next one, and so on, so on, so on. And so the first thing that it checks is it is not equal to hello, it is not equal to hello, so it prints that out. It does not need to go into the else if because it's, well, it's true. It is not equal to hello, and therefore it's done this bit there. It skips over to the next bit of code, which is down here, which is the end of the code, so it stops. So what we are doing here is we have less than, greater than signs, which is basically saying it's not less than, not greater than hello. Which if it's not greater than and it's not less than, then it can't be it. It can't be equal to it, basically. And so that's one way of writing that. However, I don't like using that method. I think it looks untidy and it makes it difficult to see. And so what I tend to do is I do the exclamation point equals, and that does exactly the same thing. So here we get true still, and that is a nicer way of doing it, I think, because we can also do stuff like that. And so we have more flexibility over our comparisons. Also, it just generally looks nicer, I think. So if we delete that bit of code there, and here what we do is we're just going to carry on checking with this bit. We're going to turn back into integers, actually. So we're going to do x equals 15, y equals 45 again, and then do if, and the next one to cover is greater than. So if x is greater than y, then what we're going to do is we are going to echo true. Well, actually, that's not really helpful. X is bigger than y. Else, and we're going to echo y is bigger than x. Okay, so now if we go to the echo, here we find that y is bigger than x, which is true. And if we change the operators around, just ignore the string. Ignore what these strings say, but it will change to x is bigger than y, even though that is not true. Y is still bigger than x, but just ignore that, it's fine. The only thing that's wrong there, the only thing that's wrong there is the sentence, not the actual main content. So the conditional checks. So don't worry about that. And here what we can do is we can do, if I change this to be if x is greater or equal to 15, then here we'll see that x is bigger than y, which is still what the string is. Here we, oh, that looks wrong, oh well. What you see is that we have conditional which checks whether it's greater than or equal to 15. If we change that to just greater than, then that will turn false. But if I had 15.1, you'll see that that is true. And so when you're doing comparisons, if you have decimals and stuff, they are still counted, even though you're checking against integers, it doesn't matter. And then what we finally got is the opposite of that, which is less than or equal to, which is this operator. Less than or equal to, and if I do 15 again, that will come up as being true. It's going to manually change that. And if I change this one to 14 for now, we'll see that is false. And so as we look at it, you sort of get a basic understanding of what these sort of conditionals are and what the operators are for them. However, just to make things a little bit more confusing for you, there are more conditional operators. And so I'm just going to cover these for you. We've already seen one of them, which is useful, and that's the not one, which is where you have the exclamation point. So, isn't... Oh, by the way, an easy way to do if statements is just to put brackets out. So if x doesn't equal y, echo, something like that works fine. Okay, normally works fine. Let's have a look. I think that's right. Okay, ignore what I just said. Wait. Okay, well, I don't know what's wrong there. Basically, you can use just the brackets to do conditionals and then stuff like that. However, it's not neat and tidy to do it that way, so I tend to just put the if and else in there anyway, because it makes it look so much nicer. And we have obviously stuff like that not, which I mentioned before, which is x is not equal to y, which obviously is true because it's not the same number. But we also have, say, if x is equal to 15 or y is less or greater than 50. Now, only one of these is true, so I'm just going to go. Only one of those is true, so if we preview that, here we get the word true, and that's because what this does is it's an OR operator, which I believe can be changed with the word OR. Like that. Yep, you can change that with the word OR, but it's much better to use symbols. Symbols are more universally recognised throughout programming languages, and quite often they are the same symbols used throughout different languages, so it's better to do it that way than anything else. And basically, these are the two pipes, which on a Windows keyboard is next to the backward slash, which is next to the shift on the left-hand side of the keyboard, but if you're using a Mac, it is on the right-hand side of the keyboard, just above the other shift. And next to the return key. And that is just two of those next to each other in the middle of an operator if statement thing, and it will check whether or not one condition is true or the other condition is true. If one of them is true out of the two, or three or four, however many you choose to do, it changes accordingly. And then finally, the last one is the AND operator, which, as you can see, we can just do the word AND when that returns false, or we can do it with symbols, which is again the preferred way of doing it, and that is the two ampersand symbols. And that hasn't worked. Oh no, that came out as false again because, as you can see, 45 is not bigger than 50, and 15 is equal to it. So that is where it works for the OR. It won't work for AND. But if you have two things which are right in an OR statement, so if we had greater than 40, for example, here this will come up as true, and even if we change this to OR, it will come up as true as well, because one or more things is what's needed for an OR statement, whereas an AND needs every single one to be true. So that's the end of the... no, that was a long one, that was about 15 minutes, that one, sorry about that. That's the end of the conditional operators. And the next thing that we're going to have a look at is switches, which is another way of doing if and else, basically. So if I change this quickly. Oh, by the way, if you can, if my mouse goes off screen, basically what I've done, I've got two screens up at the moment, and on one screen I've got little notes and my timer and stuff going, and on this screen is where I'm doing all the code. The notes are basically just so that I try and make as few mistakes as possible, because obviously at the moment I'm up to 50 minutes, and I'm starting to get a bit tired, so the least mistakes I make, the better, really. Okay, so on the switch, if we do x is equal to 15 again, and we do switch x, and we do, oh, forgot the curly brackets. And then what we do is we have cases, so case, let's see, we're going to do several of these to show the purpose of it. So if we do greater than 5, let's do that one. Case greater than 5, we do a colon. What we do here is we're going to do echo bigger than 5. And what we do is after every single case we have to break. And what that break does is it means that it won't carry on looking through the rest of the code. Breaks can be used in several different things, like loops, if-else statements, and things like that. And this is the only one where it's actually necessary to use it. All the other ones can be worked without loops, but in switch statements you need to have the loop and the break. Okay, so say if we did case less, sorry, I have to change. Let's do less than 5. Echo smaller than 5. And then finally, case 15. And that is where it checks that it's equal to 15. And so we're going to do echo equals 15. Great. And then there's one last one which I'm just going to cover now, just because I think that it's the most useful one of the lot. And that is the default one. Now what a default does is if this isn't true, this isn't true, this isn't true, then that one is the one that gets printed. And so what we are going to do now is preview this. Okay, let's see. Oh, of course. There we go. So now we can see that it's bigger than 5, that is true. I'm just going to delete this one for now, because so that we can see other results which it gives. Equals 15. Now what this does again is it's logical. It finds the first one, and because we had to put that break in, it's going to go through and it's going to skip the rest of them and not bother checking, which is not what we want. So if we preview this now, we've got bigger than 15, smaller than 15, sorry, bigger than 5, smaller than 5 equals 15. And so that's the importance of the break. If there is no break, it doesn't work. Let's see. Okay, so okay, so now if I change this to equal just 5, what this should do is come up with none. And that is because, if you remember, we had the operators less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, because less than and greater than do not work with the same number. So less than 5 and greater than 5 is not, when it comes up as 5, neither of them are true. So that's the purpose of default one, it's that it will send it through without any of the previous ones being true, and so default should be the one that comes last in your list. Also, you should notice that these are colons and these are semicolons. There is a difference, and even though and I can tell it's small screen and stuff, but there is a big difference. It will not work if you put a semicolon on the case. That's the end of switches. So I'm just going to 55 2. Sorry. Oh, just got an email. Okay, and so the next thing that we're going to cover is arrays, which I'm just going to take a 30-second break, and then I'll be back. Right, okay, I'm back now. Just went to get a quick drink, that's all. Right, okay, so when we have arrays, basically, how we describe an array is a way to hold multiple pieces of information within one string, or within one variable, rather. And so we have, say if we have the string for cake, and we could have, say, cake is equal to, and then we have like Victoria, then we need to do cake 2 is equal to let's see, ginger cake, then we have cake 3 is equal to cheesecake, stuff like that. As you can see, this will take a lot of time and a lot of memory up if we were to do it this way. And so what we do is instead we create an array, and so we just have, I'll call it cakes for now. I'll call it cake and get rid of all this. So what we do is we have cake, which is now equal to, then we do array, and the first one we have, like, what was it? It was Victoria. Then the next one is equal to, let's see, what was it? Ginger. And then the next one was equal to cheesecake. Now, as you can see, this, or actually you may not know, depending on whether you've done any languages before, this is a sort of a function which basically it will compile these three into that one variable. And the way that we reference that is if we do echo cake and print that out, you get the word array, and that is because it comes up as a data type of being array, and that is no good for if you're trying to echo out. It doesn't know what to echo out, and the way that you can get around that is you could use a function which is print r, which I'm not sure what R stands for, but it basically prints out the array like that. But that's no good if you're trying to display a piece of data to somebody, really, because it's not very user friendly. And so what we do is we do echo and then cake, and we reference the area in which the cake is stored using square brackets and then a numerical system of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, blah blah blah, etc. And so when you reference number 1, you would expect it to come up with Victoria, but you will find that that is not true. It comes up with Ginger. And what it does is, the reason for that is computer systems always start with an index of 0, and this is a type of index. This is the index of that array, and therefore 0 would come up with Victoria. And if by that logic, 2 would come up as cheesecake. But if we were to do 3, which doesn't exist, you get nothing. It doesn't throw an error, and so you need to be careful when you're going through these sort of things as to what it would be. So that's how you set up an array, but then there's also different types of arrays. The first one I'm going to cover now is going to be associative array. That one was called a numerical index array. This one's associative index array, which is basically, I'm going to change this to, let's see, cake 1 is equal to Victoria. Cake 2 is equal to Ginger. As you can see, the way that it's set up is that we do equals and then less than. Equals and greater than. It creates a sort of form of an arrow sort of thing. And so that is how we reference what it is that we are calling. So that is now the index. I'll separate these into different lines to make it easier. This is now the index, and that is the value. So So when we have the index and the value before, by default the index is the numerical system. So it's got 0, 1, 2. Now the way that we do this now, if we do echo cake 0, it might work actually, it might not. It doesn't work, and that's because we've changed the index to be a cake 1. So now what we have to do is inside quotes do cake 1, and that will now print out Victoria. Now what we could do is, these don't have to be strings, these could be all sorts of things. It could be a variable for all it matters. So variable x is equal to Victoria. So if we were to change this to be variable x, there you go, it still works as Victoria. And that is basically, we're setting that index to be 15 and we're checking for index 15. So if we change this over to 15, we still get Victoria. So that's one way in which it can work quite well. And also, if you don't like setting up the zeros, if you don't like the idea of working with zeros, then you can change it to 1, 2, 3, etc. yourself. All you need to remember is that if you're setting the data yourself, so if you're setting the index yourself, you need to do equals and then greater than, and then the actual value. And also the comma is what you need to do to separate different types of pieces of information. So there, if we do index 2, instead before that one would have been the third one, it is now the second one, which is ginger. Now that is useful in several different circumstances, and usually, well, if you're doing things inside a loop, which we'll cover later on in several tutorials time. And so if we look at this now, there is one more type of array which is called a multi-dimensional array. And so the way this works is, I'm going to delete all these. Okay, so I'm going to do some, let's see, I'm going to do people, which with an array, and the first one is going to be Alex. And now what we're doing here is we're doing it where it's an associative index array, and so we're doing Alex is equal to, but then we put another array on the inside. And so what we do here, here we go. Okay, I'm just trying to make this look nicer. Okay, so what we're going to do is my index array, so my array for me is going to be, have my age, so say my age is 16, it's going to also contain my city, which is Manchester, and then say the country, which is UK. So that is my array setup. I'm just going to move this across. And within my array, what you can see is that we have several pieces of data. We have Alex, and I'm 16 years old. I live in Manchester in the UK. So this could be used for different sort of things, such as profile information storage, whilst things are being actually loaded on the page. We'll get into databases later on, which is where you'll most likely store people's information. But for now, we're just going to store it in an array. And so from there, what you do is, because that's just an array, that is considered to be one value. So Alex is equal to a value, that's fine. So what you do there is you'd have to put a comma, and then you could do the next one. So if I did Joe, and that is equal to an array of, say, age 17, city, Melbourne, and then say country, I think Melbourne, I think that's Australia. So what we have there now is we have two different arrays going, but that is considered to be just one array, and that's why it's called a multi-dimensional array, because it has an array inside an array. and that can go on for infinite number of times. And so you could have an array inside an array inside an array. So city, you could have city lived. You could have an array in there which has, say, Manchester, and then say several other cities where I may have lived before, something like that. And then the way to reference that is people. Actually, echo people, and if we do Alex, what we get here is we get the word array, because that is what is stored. Okay, we get a parse error. We shouldn't. Oh, yeah, we do, because we didn't put a semicolon there. Okay, that's fair enough. Let's see. There we go. We get the word array. And so, the reason for that is because even though we're looking here, and we've referenced this one correctly, there is an array stored in here. And so what we need to do here is we need to reference it using age, for example. And I'll get my age here, 16. And so the way that it works is that, say if we had a multi-dimensional array of 7 layers, we'd do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so it can look confusing, and there's lots of square brackets, but each of these square brackets represents one dimension. And so this is a 2-dimensional array. Actually, no, it'll be a 3rd-dimensional array because it's got 3 layers. It's got that layer and that layer with the variables there. So it's a multi-dimensional array with the data stored from me. So if you look at my name, Alex, and then you see that my age is 16 here. And so if I change, I don't know what to find out the country, change that one, and it'll tell me country. If I decide to change and find out where Joe lives, then we just change that country, and it comes up with Australia. So that's how a multi-dimensional array works, and that is pretty much all there is to it. The next thing we're covering is going to be loops, and the main thing to do with loops is that we're going to be using arrays again, so try not to forget what we just covered, and I will have a look. We'll do for loops first, I think, because that can use numbers. Let's see, so okay, now we've got the loops going. For x is equal to 0, x is less than 5, x increments. Okay, we've got a little issue there, put the x in. Okay, so now what we've got is we've got x is equal to 0, and this is the initialization, which is where we set the variable. So we don't need to have x is equal to 0 here, we could have, say, x is equal to 0 up here, x is equal to 0, and then just have reference x here. All you need to do is initialize what it is that we initially want to do with this array, with this loop rather, and then here is what the conditional is, and that is the incrementation. Incrementation is not required, you can put it inside the actual loop, but it doesn't really matter which way you do it, but that way it looks neater, because also you can tell it's got 3 different areas, you know, the 3 areas are right, and it should work. And so now here we're going to do, we're just going to do echo here what we're doing is we're just looping through where x is 0 up till x is 5, going up by 1 each time, and we're going to print out what that number is, and this is just HTML for a line break. So within quotes and strings, if you echo it out and it's HTML, it will be styled as it should be. Let's see. Put a semicolon there. There we go. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So here we have the first one, the second one, 2, 3, 4. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times it's been through. We asked it to loop it 5 times. Because it started with 0 and we wanted it to reach 5. The reason it doesn't reach 5 is because we're checking that it's less than 5, not less than or equal to. So if we do that, it adds another row to it. So we could do less than or equal to 99 if we chose to, and it would just loop it until it got to 99.
So here you'd see all the way down to 99. It goes there. Okay, so that's that completely done. And that's basically the extent of which for loops are used, really. Like, say, if I was to have an array set up, we could have it so it printed out different pieces of information, which actually I'll show you how that works. So check that down to 3, we can have array is equal to array okay, so that's that done. 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, that will work. And each one of these now will just simply there we go. Each one of these now, what it'll do is it'll loop it. So the first one it checks at 0. The 0 is less than 3. So what it does is it goes down here and goes echo, and then it looks at the array for where x is equal to 0. So it's array equal to 1. The variable the value is 1. And then once it's finished that line and it's got to this bracket, it goes back up here and finds this and it increments that by 1. So now it goes through it again. So x is equal to 1. 1 is less than 3. Echo goes to the array, looks here, looks at index 1, which is where the value 2 is. And then we echo that out. It does it again and again. As many times as it is until this condition fails to be true, and that is when it skips to the next part. So if we go here and we preview it, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, which is what we expected to get, because 0, 1, 2, 3. 0 is x is equal to 0 until x is equal to 3. So that is perfectly fine way of working it, and that is pretty much the extent of which you can get oh, actually, it may be worth noting okay, so here what we do is we add, and this might not work, but it's worth checking. You can separate some of these values out by commas, so you can have multiple bits inside each one. So, okay, that didn't work. Ignore what I just did, that's fine. Okay, so that's the end of that is the end of loops, the for loop rather. The next loop we're going to look at is going to be the while loop. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set it up. So here, the syntax for while loop again is pretty much the same. Okay, and then there's also something I need to mention to you afterwards as well. But the first thing to do is within the while loop we have a conditional, which is like what we had for the for loop. So if we do again with x is equal to 15, then while, and then if we do the conditional as being x is less than 30, which is going to be true, then we're going to do echo less than 30, and then we're just going to increment it, and what we should get is less than 30, 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 blah 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 blah, until it reaches 30, that's when it stops. So if I change that to 40, it will happen 10 more times. Except for I just missed it. Code. It seems to be doing this, and I don't understand why the code randomly deletes half of itself. There we go, you can see what it's done, it's added 10 more of them. Now, the main purpose of a while loop is
it checks whether or not it's true, and whilst it is true, that's when it does a conditional. Not whereas a for loop, what it does is it starts and checks, and like does incrementation. With a while loop, you don't need to do incrementation. The incrementation is just for this example. It would work without incrementation, but it would be an infinite cycle. There you go. As you can see, it's been infinite, and so it's not a good idea. Okay, so that is the end of the while loop, and that's the end of looping altogether. Okay, the next one for us to look at is, let's have a look at my notes. Okay, we're going to have a look at functions, I believe. Would be the next logical step. This, like, seriously, if you have a Mac, don't get Coda. It's horrible. Because this has not happened to me before. I think it's because I'm also recording at the same time, which is sort of ruining the balance, but it is not good. Okay, so the first thing for us to do is to go, and when we create a function, what we do is we use the keyword function. Then we create a function name, so I'm just going to do increment 1, and we put brackets there. And then we do curly brackets. Inside the curly brackets is where the body goes. So the body, we're going to do x plus return x plus plus. Return x plus plus. Now that makes no sense at the moment. That does nothing. However, what you will see is if we decide to over here, this is where our parameters are going to be. And so we're going to do x equals 0. And that equals 0 is what is considered to be a default value. And so if there's nothing else added, then it will just do it by 0. So if we did echo increment 1, then we should get the value 1. Okay, we've got the value 0. Return x plus plus x equals 0. Okay, whatever. If we add 5 here, preview that, there we go, we get the value 5. I don't know why it's not incrementing it. Let's try it now. There we go, that's working now. So if we remove this value here, there we go, we get to 1 again. Sorry about that. Okay, so as you can see, to create functions, it is fairly easy, and once you get the hang of creating several functions, there is very useful things you can do with it. And the main purpose behind a function is that it will stop you from doing things repetitively. One thing I did forget about the loops actually is the do while loop. So I'll just have to quickly skip back to that. But we're finished on functions for now, so it's fine, don't worry about that. What is worth noting actually is that the return here is what we do to send the value back to here. If we didn't have return x, then that would not do anything. It would increment it, but we wouldn't know. And so when you echo a value from a function, you need to have it returned for it to actually work. Okay, so that's the end of that one. Okay, now, so like I said, if we go back to the while loop, okay, we'll go back to the line of code. There we go. Okay, so here you can see if we change this to be a do while, what it does is it checks it first, and then what it will do is, after it's checked it first, checked it once rather, it will go back, so it'll run the code once, after that it will go and actually do the while. So line 8. Okay, just a second, let me check my notes on why I do while loop. What syntax where it is. Ah, of course. Sorry, it was my mistake that. Okay, the syntax for this one is actually quite different. What we do is put the block of code in here, so echo less than 30, and this is where we do while, and then x is less than 30. And now if we run that, sorry, I forgot a semicolon. Okay, most of the time in loops you do not put semicolons, only if it's like this. So semicolon here. Okay. That should work. I'm not sure why it isn't. Let me just check my notes again. Oh, well, we forgot the incrementation, but that shouldn't have made any difference. Oh, okay, that was what the difference was, never mind. Okay, so as you can see, it does exactly the same thing, except for it loops it once before it actually does the while check. And so if that was to be 35, go over here and check, we get it once, even though that while loop is not true, it checks it once and then does the actual conditional. This can be useful, but I tend not to use it because it tends to get more confusing than anything. And then we finally also have a for each loop, which is, I completely forgot about that one earlier, my mistake. It loops through a block of code, it loops through like a block of code like every other type of loop does, but it does it for each element in an array. So if we had an array set up as being, sorry, there we go. There we go, and if we do for each array as array segment, from there what we can do is we can do echo array segment, and sorry, we need to run that, don't we? Okay, that's taken a long time to load. Ah, this computer's really starting to annoy me. Okay, just give me 2 seconds to sort my computer out. Right, okay. Hopefully this will work now. Here we go, so here we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And what this does is it splits the array into several different segments or values. And so quite often what you'd see is split k into array as k is equal to v. What that does is it has sorry, just give me a second. So the k is what the key is, and the v is the value. And so here what we do is we do 0 equals 1, 1 equals 2, 2 equals 3, 3 equals 4, 4 equals 5, 5 equals 6, and so on like that. And the k is the key, so here, because it's a numerical index, where we have 1, that is actually a 0, where we have the 2, that is actually a 1, is the index area, and this is the values. And so that is the all types of loops, and because I had to do them in 2 different sets of videos, I will quickly just cover them again. Like, I won't teach you them, I'll just cover them. And so the 4 types of loops we have are the for loop, for each, while, and do while. So if you're confused by any of those, then you'd best go back and just have a quick check, because well, it will help you understand it, because it's quite a complicated thing to sort of get your head around, but once you do, you'll understand the purpose and why you should use them. Okay, so the next one that we're actually going to check is we're going to cover I'll cover get first, I think. This is going to be probably the most confusing part of the entire tutorial so far, and this concept took me a long time to try and understand, and I have no idea why it took so long. It's just I could not get my head around why it worked that way. But basically, just echo get name, and that is all we need to do. And then when we go to preview, first there's nothing there, but if you sometimes see, ooh, that shouldn't happen. Why is it loaded that way? Right, okay, we're going to have to try and load it back in this way again. There we go, it's working again, so that's fine. Here we go. So here we have name equals to Alex, and therefore it prints out Alex. And so this is what we call the get variable, and it's a super global variable, and that's because it is available by default, basically. That's all you really need to understand about it, is that no matter what page you're on, it will always be available. The values will be different, and so on, but it will always be there. Like, it's preset, basically. And where this is used is most often it is used if you need to have several different pages. So if you go to, classic example of it could be google.com, and when you do a search, hello, here you can see we've got hundreds and hundreds of different pieces of information being questioned and asked to the server, and it's all of these ampersands and all of the, well, there's one question mark which I can't actually see, but yeah, all of that sort of stuff, it's questioned towards the server, and the server is then referencing that to the database and so on. But that's the way it works. It's kind of complicated to understand, it's kind of hard to explain as well, really. But if you have the question mark and then your name, in this case, it's because that is what we call our variable. It's basically a key. Think of it like an array. So that is the index, or the key, depending on what you want to call it. I'm going to call it the key, I think. So that's the key, and that is the value. And so what we're doing here, we're referencing get, which is now considered to be an array, so a variable. And we're referencing the key, or the index, of name. And here we find that the name value is Alex. So if we go back over here, and if we do echo age,
if we echo my age, just make sure that. Oh, by the way, it does have to be all capitals as far as I'm aware. I don't think it works if you have lowercase. Send over. Refresh. Okay, so now you might be wondering why it's not actually appearing. And if I do age equals 16, you can see something's not right there. It's not showing up properly. It's considering Alex question mark age equals 16 to be my name rather than the Alex. Sorry, name is Alex and age is 16. The reason for that is because the first one we referenced with a question mark. That is to show that we're using the get variable, whereas after that, what we do is we use the ampersand sign. Shouldn't save it. Refresh. Both the ampersand sign. Oh, that didn't work. With the ampersand sign, keep refreshing it, and I shouldn't. I should reload the page. There we go. Alex 16. So we use the ampersand sign to separate the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, etc. from the first get variable, which is simple enough to understand, I think. So if you actually don't understand that at all, just post it in the comment section below because it is a confusing thing to get your head around. And finally, we are going to use the post one. Now the post one, we have to do a bit of setup first, so we're just going to do quick form. I'm not going to explain this at all. This is simply just a basic HTML form. If you don't know how to do this, then go and find somebody who's teaching HTML. Maybe get a book out on it, or go and just search YouTube or Google or something. Because I don't really do HTML tutorials because I don't really enjoy HTML that much. So I'm just going to do input type. Okay, so that's that setup. What we're going to do is we're going to do echo post. Okay, one crucial thing I forgot then, didn't open PHP brackets or PHP tags. So echo it's also a post which we're using. It does matter whether you're doing post or get, and I'll explain why in a second, but basically post is more secure because, as you saw before with get, it is readable from the just from the browser. So if you would send a password over that way, it would basically, everybody who saw the computer screen would know what that person's password was, which obviously is not a secure way to do things. This is the age. Now, as you can see, age here is the name of this input field, and age is also the key. That is, they are both the same thing. So age here is going to be referencing that. So if I load the page, okay, I'll just go straight over and do it in the browser. I don't understand why it's not working anymore, but whatever. So if we go over here, refresh this one, and 16, put that as my age. Here we get age equals 16, which is exactly what we would expect it to show. So that's what I typed. So if I change that to 99, it could be my age being 99 and so on. So that is how you use post. Now the final one I'm going to show you is request. And with request, with request, what it does is we can do it either way. So if we refresh this page, it sends it as 99, whereas if I reload it this way, it loads it as being 16. And so with request, it will take into consideration
which one it wants to do, and it takes priority with the post. So if we send get and post at the same time, it will take priority with the post, even though get may have already been set previously and so on. Post is the most likely one for it to follow because it's the one which is harder to replicate artificially. It's not very difficult to replicate artificially, but it's a lot easier to do just to add a little bit of string here, so that is why that one is the one that shows up first. No, it shows up last rather. Right, okay, so that is the end of this tutorial. It has lasted for 1 hour and 35 minutes. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.